Feel like there's always a new employment law or HR requirement that you have to unpack or decipher? With only so many hours in a day, it is hard to keep up. I know it is ridiculously hard for me and my clients. That's why Comply Right, who is the leading provider of employment law compliance solutions, actually developed a podcast that is easy to digest. It's called Talking HR Compliance, and it covers trending HR topics like hiring and record keeping, along with tax reporting and legal compliance. And you get practical insights you can use from an experienced HR solution manager who's actually seen it all. And that's what we all need. Just tell us what to do. Check it out over a morning cup of coffee or on your commute. You can find it where you listen to any of your podcasts, whether it be Google, Stitcher, Apple, or Spotify. And make sure you subscribe. Again, it's called Talking HR Compliance. You don't want to miss an episode.
Potent advice and inspiration from real self-made millionaires. Welcome to The Eventual Millionaire with your host, Jaime Masters.
Welcome to Eventual Millionaire. I am Jaime Masters, and today on the show, we have Mark Mills. You can check him out at mark.co.uk, and he sold a £100 million annual revenue company and has had 3 exits himself. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Jaime.
I love working with and chatting with people that have done exits because I don't think people talk about it. We're all building to sell, supposedly, but when it actually comes time to sell, I feel like people get beat up a lot. So can you talk about your experience with your companies and being able to sell, especially the first one?
Absolutely. I think one of the interesting things is that the process really has to start when you start the business, when you think about it. Because if you are looking to build a business to sell it, then really from day one, you should start to think with the exit in mind. And if you do that, then your preparedness will make it a lot easier as you go through the process of building your business and then subsequently exiting it. So I think that the thing that I would give as a piece of advice is to start with the end in mind. So even if you're in your business now and you're thinking about the exit, start to think what that looks like and start to think in not a negative way, but about things that may impact the exit negatively. So be ruthlessly honest with yourself is what I always say to people about the things that due diligence might uncover or a potential acquirer might not be as keen on as you would like.
See, it's funny because it always seems so far away to people, especially at the start of the business. They're just trying to get it up and going, right? It always feels like it's later. So what are some of those things that you, as a business owner, don't want to look at that really will probably come up and exit? Like, give me some examples.
I think mainly it's to do with contracts and terms with customers and suppliers. That's kind of the thing that always bites people, because as you go along and you make agreements and you do things sometimes on a handshake almost, or on a sort of outdated contract, or you amend the terms of trading, but you don't amend the documentation, this is all going to come back later. So what I say to people is you have to really go through those levels of detail and think, you know what, that big customer, we signed them up 5 years ago. The terms don't really suit what we now do for them. So having that conversation earlier in an exit process rather than later is definitely the right thing to do. Because if you get towards the end and you start trying to have those conversations, that's when people can really, hold a gun to your head if they're a customer and negotiate price and things like that. So you've really got to do it sort of in the bit where you've decided to exit, but you're actually pre the documentation stroke due diligence, and then you're in lots of time, basically.
I feel like there's a million of those type things that we don't, it's just sort of as you're going through your business that just happens and you kind of almost forget about it, right? Is there like a checklist? Is there anything that just has a list for your due diligence documents beforehand that owners can look at before they're even ready to go down that path?
Yeah, I mean, most lawyers or solicitors, as we call them, will have a sort of standard due diligence list, which, to be fair, across the world is pretty standard and tends to cover all the salient points. So I would, in starting an exit process anyway, if you've built your business, I would be talking to the lawyers and solicitors pretty early on anyway, and really going around, as we all do, getting different sort of quotations for how much it's going to cost you, because they can all charge, can't they, attorneys. in particular. So going around those guys and saying, look, can you give me a list of the things that you think are going to come up or from your experience? So really, you can get a lot of this information for free, but it stands you in very good stead to have that list when you're starting your business, not just when you're thinking of exiting, because there's lots in there that actually, if you think about running your business as you're going to exit it from day one, you kind of run it better anyway, in my opinion, because you're sort of on speed. It's like turbocharged, because you never make a decision that won't be exit focused.
You're preparing in advance, and therefore you're being proactive about absolutely everything instead of reactive later, which again is more energy in the end. But it's funny because when you're running your business, it seems like there's always not enough time and not enough money, right? So it's tough to go, okay, I know I need to be doing some of this stuff. And I think the people listening are probably assuming that it's going to take a ridiculous amount more time or more money or more resources or whatever it is to do those lists. Do you really think that it will?
No, because it's just a different way of doing the same thing. So, it's a bit like if you have board meetings every month, if your company's of a certain size, you're going to have to write a board paper anyway. If you write the board paper in the vein of you're going to exit, it doesn't take any more effort. If you think about the best way of dealing with your customers, it's not a great way to deal with your customers on terms that are outdated with documentation that's lagging behind. So really, there's a good business sense, isn't it, to actually get your documentation right anyway. Same with your supply chain. So actually, it's no more effort. It's just a sort of refinement of what you're doing, really. Challenging and being ruthlessly honest with yourself about whether in actual fact those terms and conditions are in the right place, or we're holding over on a lease and really we should have signed a new one. And just that sort of thing that anybody watching is probably going to think, I've got some of those, we all have.
That's but, it. Yeah. We're always like, I don't want to look under the bed. That's where we shove all the stuff. Right. Yeah. And to be able to take it out, it's tough.
And it's just a guarantee. That's what comes back and takes lots of time in the end. Invariably is earning, is price detrimental, and takes a disproportionate amount of time, which therefore costs you more as well. So it's like a double whammy. It's going to cost you more. You're going to get less for it, and you've got more work. So hey, get prepared and get those things on the table now.
Let's say we actually do have some of those chunks. It is an interesting thing. I would love for you to walk me through the whole process. I have a client going through this right now, and it does seem like there's a lot of little loopholes along the way, or the length of time that it takes is just ridiculous. And I don't think a lot of people even understand what the full process is. Can you sort of walk me through so that way everybody can understand?
Sure. So I would say the process begins with you making the decision that you've got a good reason for wanting to exit. So one of the things that doesn't tend to work in my experience, if somebody just decides sort of unilaterally, I want to sell, and there's no actual reason other than just the money, because that's kind of the worst reason. Because if you put yourself in the shoes of the buyer, which I'll tell people to do a lot, then they're not really going to be that enthusiastic about buying a company from somebody that just wants out and just wants the money. I'm going to take the money and run. That's not a good basis for an acquirer to buy your business. So if you've come to your epiphany of, I've worked very hard, I've worked for a long time, or it's at a size where I can't manage the growth further, or whatever, then you've got a genuine starting point as a reason for exiting. So then really the process starts with getting internally prepared. So you can go at this point and see your attorneys, lawyers, solicitors and accountants or corporate finance guys. But I would say it's doing that root and branch, as we've mentioned already, on contracts, etc., employment contracts, building leases, customer supply arrangements, all of that good stuff, banking arrangements, etc. Doing a real housekeeping process. Looking through things like your strategy documents, if you've written any, when you've had strategy days with your team, what came true, how good are you at execution? Looking at what your accounts say and whether there are areas of your accounts where you're just leaking some cash, which actually you're going to get a multiple for, so isn't worth doing. So go through that process and then start talking to the best advisors you can possibly find, who may charge you more than the ones you currently have, but in the end they'll be worth the money, many times over. And then the thing that I tend to do is, and I try and make this answer not too long because obviously it can be, but is to basically write a presentation on your business, which the acquirer can use to sell your business to internal parties and possibly external parties on their side of the fence. So they literally take your presentation and say, wow, I can just kind of copy and paste the top, put my name on the bottom and go and sit with my board and explain this to them. It's so well formulated and it's such a great fit. And if you've got that level of presentation, sorry.
No, that's what I want. I want to dive deep into that level of presentation because I think that's a piece that's missing a lot. It's like, hey, my business is for sale. Who wants it? And it's like, there's a whole bunch that goes into it. So what goes into that presentation?
So really, it's probably three elements. So it's where you've been, where you're at, and where you're going in a level of detail, though. So I would start off by, the usual, introducing the team, what the company does, etc. But then talk about where that all came from. So that why are we in business? Well, we started it because we thought there was a market for these. We started making them. We realized we had to move to the side a little bit, as we typically do. We had a plan B and we ended up making those. This is our addressable market. This is what our customers love about us. This is how we've got defense in it. So things like barriers to entry, defensibility, big and good stuff, because you're going to be explaining your business to somebody that's in a position to acquire it, has probably got the capital. So it's not good if you give everything away or say, look how easy it is. So you've got to keep some of the secret sauce there. And then you've got really, look, where could this go? And one of the main it's not a trick, but a tip I found that really helps owners who want to exit is to really explain and be honest about that under a bigger umbrella company, your business could go further because it's possible that your skill set isn't there to take it on to the next level. And that's nothing, negative about anybody. We're all different, aren't we? So I think if you've got that explanation, if you say, look, if this were part of a bigger entity and had more resources in sales and marketing, production, could drive costs down, better market penetration, sorry, get the words out, overseas markets, etc. And you've got that big brother company that could buy you, then that can go on. So I think that's one of the things, that's the main thing really that the acquirer is interested in, because the current and the past is kind of very interesting. But what's in it for me? What am I going to get if I buy this business?
That makes perfect logical sense. And it's funny because if somebody's actually creating this, they're probably going to notice, oh crap, there isn't a barrier to entry really. Oh no, what about that? How can we, right? Because when we build businesses, sometimes they're not all perfect. So you're like, oh, maybe we should work on that a little bit more.
Exactly.
Maybe, yeah.
Exactly, that housekeeping of, well, what do we have in our armory? Where are we a bit weak, etc. And then the other big tip, which I have to mention, because again, I mentioned it probably a couple of times, is that you've really got to think about anything that could possibly put the buyer off. And if there is something, because again, we haven't built perfect businesses, that's better to get out on the table in the presentation rather than later on, because otherwise you're going to waste a lot of time.
So no, I was just saying, so you're just upfront and completely honest, like these are some of the issues we might run into, so that way they've got the lay of the land in advance?
Definitely. And, there's no perfect world, because if you sign up a customer on a new 5-year agreement and then decide to exit, you may have a business that you could run for another 5 years, so why would you sell? Similarly, if it's at the 4th year of a 5th-year contract, the buyer's probably going to say, well, what if they don't renew the contract, etc. So you're better off just figuring out what the good and the bad is and then just putting it out there. It's going to be reflected in the end in the price anyway. So obviously you're going to accentuate the positive and you're going to do everything you can to mitigate any downside, but it's still not perfect. So you've still got to get everything out on the table, in my opinion, early on.
So that's funny. It's when you say everything, I'm like, well, what if they find that their good and their bad are definitely skewed and not totally even, right? Then they got to clean up some stuff on the back end before they actually go out and give that proposal to anyone, right?
Yeah. So and the main reason that you don't have success in trying to sell a company, in my opinion, is because the person buying it is worried that if they do the transaction with you, they're going to look stupid afterwards. So that's the main driver. It's not the financials or anything else. It's literally like a pride thing that somebody turns them in a bar 6 months after and says, really, you bought that company? What a disaster. And it's like, that is not a good start. So everything you do in the presentation is about basically mitigating that. So if there is something bad in there, they can say to their board, colleagues, friends, whatever, yeah, we knew about that at the beginning. That was factored into price. So there's no...
They feel better about themselves. Isn't it funny? It's all about self-image. Even at that level, it still matters.
Absolutely. Guys and girls have lost jobs for making bad acquisitions. So, it's not a career enhancing move if you get it wrong, is it?
Definitely. So once you have that presentation, what's that next step?
So really, I would say that it's a sort of bridge of a step because it's not at the same time exactly, but do your own research. So the guys and girls you'll talk to are going to advise you, the attorneys and the corporate finance, they'll come up with potential buyers, but it's invariably you that knows the market for your business best. But what I would say is that push the envelope a bit in terms of most people immediately think that their sort of direct competitor is probably the best bet. I actually don't think that's the best version of events. I prefer what I call a thinking person's transaction, where you've done a bit of work around it yourself. You've read the news and you've looked at strategy documents, which big companies tend to put online. And also think about strategically which are the types of business that do acquisitions. A lot of listed companies are under pressure to do acquisitions because they can't get the organic growth they'd like. And they'll pay a premium, and they're good buyers because they've normally got a process to do it. So if you've researched your market in sort of peripheral areas, then when you've got that presentation ready, you can talk to your team of advisors and colleagues and say, look, ideally, there's like these 15, 20 people that could be suitable, plus the usual suspects, the competition, etc. But actually, we've got some more interesting ones. And then with the presentation, you can tailor that slightly to make it more relevant to each of those acquirers, which invariably drives the price up.
Okay, is that the best way? Like they should go out and prospect themselves to try and find who's a really good strategy and then approach them, or should they be doing it themselves? Or
well, no. Right. So a bit of a trick. It's a good question. Is you never really approach anybody until you've been approached. So what you need is a catalyst. So you've made the decision, as we talked about earlier, that this is a good time to exit. What you then need is somebody to come and sort of show some interest. And it doesn't have to be a lot, but once you've got that interest, you can genuinely and honestly say to people, we've had some interest, so we've decided to run a process, right? So it's not like we thought we're going to sell. We happened to be thinking a little bit and we were getting ready, but we've now got this catalyst.
Yes.
At that point, I don't think the business owners are the best people to approach anybody. That's when a middle party, so your advisor, is a good idea, because during a process of exiting, somebody has to be the good cop, somebody has to be the bad cop.
Yep.
And you as the owner want to be the good cop because you're going to have a relationship with the company afterwards one way or another. So a bad cop you can put them in place at the beginning. They can play the good cop to start with, but they're going to be the bad cop if you need to say anything or deliver any bad news or whatever. So I think the intermediary is the best person to make the approach, albeit you may have given them the ammunition or the names even.
See, I love this. And what I get pushback from owners, though, is that they take usually a very large percentage, or it's one of those things where they're like, but I feel like I could do it myself. But you really explained that having the good cop, bad cop, it's hard to be the same person. What do you say, though, about them trying to save that capital?
Well, if you get the right ones, in theory, you should get more for your business anyway. So therefore, it's completely self-funding. If you get ones that are not that good, then it's just effectively a cost to you, right? So I always say to people, that's why you need the best possible advice you can get. Go for the big guys who might be out of your league, but sell them the story. Mm-hmm. And then actually, it's beholden on all business owners. So if I were you, Jamie, I'd be saying, right back at you, you need to negotiate better then. Because you can negotiate with these guys. They'll start off with their rack rate. But you know what? If you make it really interesting, and by the way, if you demonstrate that you're going to write a lot of the presentation and you're going to deliver it in such a way, they'll be thinking, this is a slam dunk. This is just going to sail through. We can do it for less than normal because it's going to be less work on us than it ordinarily would. So it's just negotiation, isn't it?
I really appreciate that. There's a great book called Never Split the Difference that's all about negotiation, which I highly recommend also. I don't know. Have you read that one?
I've read it, and I gave it to about 20 people as
Right.
Christmas.
See? Good. I'm glad you agree.
Absolutely. It's got some great phraseology in there. And it's
Totally.
funny because about the day after I was reading it, I was dealing with a lawyer on something, and it was like, they want 20, he wants 2, and he says, we're going to meet somewhere in the middle. And I was like, no. I said, I'm going to send you a book.
That's one of my clients saved 150 grand just from reading the book right before the final negotiation. I was like, it's worth its weight in gold, people. I love it. How do you determine if they're a good advisor, though? I feel like everybody gets referrals and you really try and get a good one. And then sometimes it still can be hit or miss.
Yeah, but hey, Jamie, I saw, and this was, one of the owners that I sold the business with taught me. He basically went into this meeting and said to me beforehand, I'm going to test them on my business. So it had all the preamble and the meetings, and he said, okay, you tell me then about my business, the good and the bad, what you like, what we should do, what we shouldn't do, what the detail on this is. And he literally grilled them for about 90 minutes. And at the end went, yeah, you're the guys for me. And we tried it with another couple. And after 5 minutes, it was a waste of time because they hadn't listened. So we knew these guys were going to be great. So, set your own tests. You would do it with, a supplier or whatever, a normal supplier. And they're a supplier effectively of a service, which is selling your company.
Okay, so I want to dive deeper into that too, because a lot of the owners that I work with really care about their team. Right. And if they're going to be on for transition and if they're not, and those things I feel like start to get really sticky on who they're actually going to choose for a buyer, especially if they really have a close knit team and they don't want to be like broken up for parts. So you know what I mean? Or whatever they're looking to do. So how do you really check on that in advance when you're going after specific buyers?
So I suppose just as a side point, you've got to be really brutally honest with your own team that not everybody's going to end up there in the long run after you've sold your business, because that's just the truth, right? So you might as well, and most people understand that. But in terms of the buyers, I think that you as a seller have to do your own due diligence. So it's not unreasonable to ask buyers to give you other business owners to whom they've promise the same things about continuity of employment, etc., and talk to those guys. If they put up resistance, I would say, hey, why are you balking at this? Because this is just me making a call to somebody that you've already done a deal with. The other thing is that what was I going to say? It's a point about the team. Well, come back to me anyway. So do the buyer due diligence piece of asking what has happened in the past, who can I talk to about this.
Is there a list for that too? Because I feel like it could be a myriad of different things also.
Really it's just about what does it look like after the event. Most transactions involve some form of earn-out, which is basically for the company to try and wed you into the transaction in the longer term. And a good barometer of the sort of kind of buyer that you're going to be dealing with is whether they actually pay earnouts out, because it's been done reasonably to start with, and therefore it's going to, all go through. And if you talk to somebody that they've already bought the company from, they say, yeah, it was all very fair, they paid the earnout, it was great, then that's a good starting point, isn't it?
What if they don't have that information in the back end? Do you know what I mean? What if this is the company's first deal and you're just guessing? Do you just not go with them because there's no record?
Yeah, I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't sell to one. And the point I was going to make, which I've now remembered, is that most of the transactions I've done haven't gone to the highest bidder in cash terms. They've tended to go to the one below that the owner has said, I feel much more comfortable that these guys are going to look after my team, because they're not so much bothered about themselves, because you're going to exit fully anyway at some point. But actually, these are the people that my team would work best with. So I think that the buyer due diligence is nothing out of, you're not being sort of pretentious by asking to talk to people or awkward. It's absolutely, you're right. This is people's livelihoods. You want to make sure you look after them. And as owners, we've all, probably got to know our teams and like them and probably become friends with them. So you wouldn't want to, leave them hanging out to dry, would you?
I appreciate you saying that. I'm really glad that it's not overall that we just care about the money. We actually care about the people. I think that's awesome. Tell me a little bit more about this timeline, though, because especially trying to get bids from other companies and timelines. What are we talking about for timeline process? And how can we get bids in at similar times and know that we can make a good decision? Because I know people have like waited even longer trying to get somebody else, and then they, it's just become too long of a process.
And you've got to get competitive tension, and if nothing else, you've got to work to a time frame. So one of the things that when I talk to owners and kind of depresses them at the beginning is when I talk to them about the time frame. So in my opinion, it can be done in less time, but in my opinion, the internal preparation, cleansing, you name it, housekeeping is probably going to take you 6 to 12 months in truth, right? Everyone wants to do it quicker, but the truth is because you've got customers, suppliers, staff, whatever, you're probably going to have that amount of time. The actual transaction from when you are absolutely prepared, presentation written, ready to go, advisors assembled, really, you should be able to execute that in 6 months at the most. In fact, if it's dragging on longer than that, you're going to get into issues over like when your year end is and doing more accounts or whatever, however it falls. But the point of the 6 months is you have to build in like what I call drop dead dates, wherein, if this hasn't happened by then, you're out of the process because we've given you enough time. And if this hasn't happened, and if you haven't reconfirmed, so along the way, if somebody's made you an offer, they've got to reconfirm it every probably fortnight to keep in the race. And we are working to time frame. So it's quite useful. I say to business owners, say we're starting on February 1, and I'm saying, right, so we should be out in, say, July. Why don't you book a holiday now for, say, the 25th of July for 3 weeks on the other side of the world? This isn't like a mini break. This is, so it has to be done. And they're always a bit nervous, but I'm telling you, if you've got that absolute backstop date, it's amazing how much it focuses a time frame. So,
oh my gosh, I tell my clients to do that in their own business just to get their systems and processes and everything ready before they go on vacation, because it really does. It makes them laser focused and almost demanding in what they're actually going to do themselves, but also of their team. They actually get so much more done, and they get to take a vacation. Like, come on, it's not bad.
I say to my children all the time, work as though it's the day before you're going on holiday. It always works, doesn't it? You get more done.
You get 1,000,000 times more done. It's so funny. If I tell my clients to take at least a quarterly little chunk of a break. We all need way more breaks than we take as owners anyway. But also the week before is 1,000,000 times more potent. And so I love that you do that too. So I'm assuming it usually works for you. That's why you have them do it. But when they get up to that point, is it like working 24 hours a day right beforehand? Or you know what I mean? Trying to get everything reared and ready to go?
Well, yeah, you know what? I think the whole preparedness piece is the bit that really serves you well at the end, because you're not going to get all that. We've got to redraft all the documents through the night thing. So when I first started out doing this, pretty much when I exited my own company, most of those deals were done on like 3-day benders of working through, and like you just fall into bed at some time, which, you couldn't even remember what day of the week it was, sort of thing. And I didn't really think that was very efficient. I could definitely feel it towards.
My brain doesn't work after a little while. I guess that's not good.
Some things were being signed that probably weren't, the best version of events. So what I decided was the preparedness thing means that most of the deals now are done in much more sociable hours. You kind of turn up at the lawyers at 10 in the morning and by 3 you're all done. But it's because you've done all the work up front, really. So it does get more intensive towards the end. And also, you've got to keep your business running, because one of the main things I say to people is whatever happens throughout the process, your business has to go in an upward trajectory. Yeah. That is like the golden rule. So, you can't say, well, of course it went backwards, because that just doesn't, happen. So you do get busier as it goes along, I admit.
Well, and it's really tough, especially if you're like, oh, I still need the business to go, and you're looking over here, and yet you're selling the business, so your focus is over here, right? And that's not good. Do you have any tips for that? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, delegation, right? So the thing about the housekeeping piece and getting all the systems in order within that is to figure out who you can push more towards to give you more time to execute the actual transaction. And again, it's a bit of a ruthlessness with yourself, because if you've got people around you working with you who you cannot effectively delegate to, you've got to question them. And also because the process is going to show that up, because they're going to due diligence not just you but your team, and therefore like this is a good time to sort that issue out with that person, because A, you can't give them any of your work, and B, they're not going to get through the process. So in all honesty, that's the key, I think.
Doesn't that creates a one wheel off kilter when you're going though, right? If you have to fire somebody, especially somebody that's important in that process, because couldn't that affect your revenue? How is it better to fire them than to limp along a little while and hope that we've got our revenue still going up?
I'm more in the firing them camp. It's just my way. But no, I think genuinely, because you're doing it ahead of time, rather than that. This is
at the beginning stage. Okay, that makes more sense. Okay, so not close to the end.
No, exactly. Yeah, because that doesn't look good.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. I was like, that doesn't seem like that would be good either. Okay. Okay, that's your whole point, though, about being super honest on the upfront, because you already went through and figured out all the pieces that there would be a problem with, whether that be an employee or anything else.
Exactly. You just got to be really ruthlessly honest with yourself. And that's the thing about then being brutally honest with the people and saying, I'm going to have to talk to some of my team about this because I won't be able to do it without them anyway. But actually, if you're not going to make it through, then I can't. If I pick a buyer that's going to be really good with people, etc., they're just going to do the same with you anyway, because I should have done it. You need to be somewhere else because this isn't going to work out. Or if we change these things, maybe it can. Great.
What advice do you have for somebody that's going through this process at the beginning, like you said, the first 6 to 12 months where you're uncovering this stuff and they uncover a whole bunch of problems? Because, that's what sometimes happens, right? Or things that people they need to fire or whatever it is. But then they're impatient business owners, like a lot of them are, and they just want to continue with the process anyway. So they keep going, but they don't fix all those things. Do you have any advice for them on potentially not doing it or being a little more patient?
Yeah, steel yourself and do it. It's just, that's the hard work. So in the book I've written, I talk a lot about the bit in the middle. So like when you start in business, it's all, fun and, we're going to set the world on fire. The bit in the middle is a bit more difficult. And then the end bit's great fun as well. The sort of, 11 o'clock on a Sunday night when you're filling out your tax forms or something and, is not the fun and sexy piece. So it falls into that category of just the grind that you've got to get through as a business owner. So sometimes you just have to do your normal day and then tack on a couple of hours at the end to get through those bits of the process. But you're going to be glad in the end, because the thing is, you're probably not going to get through a successful sale if you haven't done that. Or if you do, you won't be happy with it anyway, because you won't get the value that really you've created. So it all gets very frustrating at the end on all sides, and then doesn't tend to work. And that's actually why most deals statistically fall over, because it's not prepared enough. And actually, most of my living has been carved for the last 10 years by people who've tried it and it's not worked, and then come in and say,
please.
Begging me, please, and I've said, right, well, we just need to sort of start from the beginning. And when they try and skate over things or skirt around things, I'll say, no, that's the problem, isn't it? Because you've got to get this tough stuff done. It's not the nicest stuff, but you've got to get it done.
Well, that's why it's kind of good to have somebody that you can lean on during that process, because no offense, it's hard to make yourself go out of your comfort zone or do stuff that you really hate doing, right? To do extra hours away from your family, knowing that in advance. It's just hard when you don't have anybody else to be able to chat with or, push you like you need to be pushed at that time. Yeah.
I had a great example, and he's now a great friend, a guy whose company I sold. And after 6 months of me really working hard with him, and it was in much better shape, we'd solved a lot of people issues. He turned around to me and he said, I need to talk to you. I said, why is that? And he said, I don't think I want to sell. And I said, well, there are only 2 words for that. And it was along the lines of get lost, but it was a bit sterner. So I said to him, the thing is, I said, because I've been here with you doing all this for 6 months, I said, that's great. And you're in a great place. I said, but if I go within 6 months, I guarantee you'll be back where you were when you hated your business, hence wanted to sell. And he was like, you're right. Forget I said. But
I love owners.
You've got to, like, you've done all that. I said to him, I'm like your coach, and if I go, you will not keep going to the gym every day. It's not going to happen. We all know this.
We all need it. It is kind of funny though. You get their juice back, so they finally get excited about their business because they're making waves and movement.
It's so weird because they stood that unearthing bit, which can be negative, actually normally yields some nuggets as well. And they're like, oh, I remember now why I did this. And I love that bit. And you're sort of like, yeah, well, don't worry, we'll get more value for it because of that. So it's all good. But it's funny how people's mentality changes through the process.
Really?
And then afterwards, sometimes they're bereft. I saw one for a lady and I phoned her the next day and I spoke to her husband and he said, to be honest, Mark, it feels like we were so attached to business. He said, it feels like we've sold one of the children. And I said, well, to be honest, you wouldn't have got as much for one of the kids. Which fortunately he laughed at. But she'd spent the evening sitting in bed with baked beans on toast, crying her eyes out because she sold the business. She got a huge amount of money.
Wow.
And to be fair, I said to her, just check your bank balance. And she did. And she said, I feel a lot better.
It is funny though how attached we get because especially if you grow it from nothing into something, it's wrapped up in your identity when it comes to that too.
That's the main point. Absolutely, Jamie. It's people. It defines them because it's like Tom Smith of button fasteners or whatever. And if you lose that bit off the end, they don't know where they're at. It's like, where's my place in society? Because you're somebody that's now not in a business, you're sort of unemployed, or you might be well off, what are you doing with your time and all this, and it's all a bit weird.
How did you deal with it? Because you've done it quite a few times, and it's like people ask you, what do you do? And you're like, nothing right now, right? But then you sound like an unemployed person, right?
Same call today. I had a call with one of my old CFOs, and he said, what are you doing? So I'm pretty quiet this week, but it is the first week back, really, so I'm just sort of getting ready. But yeah, no, I think the way you deal with it is, again, in that process period, I spend a lot of time talking to owners about what the aftermath looks like, the good and the bad. So you're going to have some loss of identity, but you're going to have a lot of money. You're going to get some weird and wonderful requests for some of your money, and they're going to come from the field. And there's all this stuff, and they're like, no, that won't happen to me. And I'm like, trust me, So I go through a lot of this stuff, and I always say to them the example I've got, which is a guy in our local town that used to work with me. Every weekend I saw him, he'd come over with his wife and kids and chat to me and my wife. And when I exited my business and he didn't work for me anymore, he just walked past on the other side of the street and waved. And my wife said, gosh, he is literally for the past 6-7 years, we've spoken to him literally every week or every other week. And I said, yeah, but I'm now just some guy he used to work for. That's it. I said, I can't give him a pay rise or a new car. See what I mean? So that your importance is just
care.
Through the floor. He doesn't care. You're just the guy you used to work for, like another guy used to work for. So if you get your mind around that, and I knew that had happened because I told my other previous business, so I knew, so I'm pretty relaxed. But I must admit, with owners who've had that importance and relevance to people and power over people, in fact, it can be quite a hard thing to come to terms with. But the more you talk about it, as in on this video, the more people sort of go, oh yeah, okay, I can see that,
Well, and even when it comes, yeah, I was just gonna say,
Sorry.
even when it comes to people asking for money, this is always where everybody goes, well, not my network. Like they care about me and not about, whatever it is. Can you give me some examples of that too? Because I think it's shocking, actually.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, look, without naming names, I probably haven't done a deal yet where afterwards I've told them enough times, this is what's going to happen. No one believes me. And I got a call last Christmas and the guy said, you said that we'd get like the weird and wonderful call. I was like, yeah. He said, well, I've got a relative who apparently, this is a true story. I struggled to tell this. He was going to die unless I paid for him to go to rehab. And I was like, right, okay. But if you hadn't sold the business and you couldn't afford it, what would happen? And he was like, oh, yeah, that's a good point. I said, just say that. I said, by the way, if you pay it, you'll be paying it for the rest of your life. Yeah. So, and honestly, another one with a gambling debt of about $500,000 nobody knew about, and the debt had been sold to some like really dodgy people, and it was like, I mean, honestly, and he's like, wow. These are really professional business people who've built great companies that have got a great network, and then these people tend to come from left field, and you think, wow, what about that?
I've gotten a lot of letters, random letters. Oh my goodness, emails, all sorts of random things, just because I know all the millionaires, and it's funny. The things people ask for are very interesting, but it is a funny thing because you just assume, oh well, it's not going to happen to me. So, quick question though, when you look at is it always a win-win? I feel like whenever people sell businesses, it's always like a gray area. Everyone's like, we want win-win, but we always get sort of a gray area instead, right?
Yeah, they need to read Never Split the Difference, don't they? But I think do you mean in terms of sort of their psychology afterwards, or?
Well, all of it, right? So because they get beat up so much, and maybe if you, like you're saying, you do the due diligence up front so we don't get beat up so much, but they get beat up so much along the way, it's like a ping pong, and then they start going, oh, I'll just take whatever, you know what I mean? Or I'll just try and get as much as I can, but they hate getting beat up so much, right? And they probably haven't read Never Split the Difference. So it just doesn't feel like exactly what they want, because entrepreneurs also want as much as humanly possible that they can get typically.
Agreed. So the thing about this is that, again, it's a good thing to have good advice around you on your side, because, for example, the way I help people sell their businesses, my interests are 100% aligned with them. The more they get, the more I get, etc. The problem with most of the advisors, the attorneys, the corporate finance people is that it's disproportionately not incentivizing for them. If you get, say, another $1 million or $10 million, they might get like another $100,000 or $200,000. And they're saying, well, if we're getting a fee of $4 million anyway, if it's not going to go through and we're not going to get anything, I'd rather get 4 million than get 4 point, or not get 4.2 and get 4. So the thing is, if you've done that preparedness and you've got the right people standing behind you, you probably come out of it better. But I absolutely agree with you. I think most transactions, people come away. The buyers know that if they keep beating you up along the way, you will eventually acquiesce and the price will drop, etc. So, you've got to go into it really with a steely determination. On that point, what I always say to owners is, I only ever sell a business for people who don't actually have to sell. Because you can then always walk away. If you're in a position where you have to sell, this is just going to go downwards, basically. So get it into a shape where you're making money and you say, you know what, if it doesn't go through, I'll just do it in another year or two. But actually, the fact that you've got that attitude means it's more likely to go through anyway.
Definitely. And it makes perfect sense then if they have the actual vacation. So that way we've got a timeline already set. So we only have to be resilient for a short period of time. And then if it doesn't work out, then you have an exit strategy on that too. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
That makes perfect sense. Oh, I love this. Tell us about your book. What's the name of your book so everybody can grab it too?
It's called Making Your Mark. It's a bit corny, but it's really difficult to think of the name. Eventual Millionaire is a lot better. But,
I liked it. I like corny. Don't even. That's awesome. They can pick it up on Amazon, and I'm assuming?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. It's on Amazon.
I know we have to start wrapping up really soon. No, it's all good. We have to start wrapping up. So I have to ask the last question. I want to ask you a million more questions. Maybe I'll have you back on the show again. But what's one action listeners can take this week to help move them forward towards their goal of $1 million?
Okay, it's pretty simple, but it's very effective, I hope. So it's basically, and I'll do it for the screen, draw 2 lines on a piece of paper. And in the 4 areas, you've put customers, suppliers, team and other stakeholders, and you list out any problem areas and basically draw it as though if it's really aligned, it's going to be a square, but it never is, because it's like, oh, we've got a big problem over there, we've got a bit of a problem over here, and work on how you can get that back to being a square within, say, the next 2 weeks. So just go and tackle all those bits. So what happens is if you've got a supply problem, it'll be affecting your customers. If your customers aren't paying, it'll be affecting your bank. If your building's got a leaking roof, it'll be affecting your staff. So you've basically got to figure out the little elements within there and do everything you can to keep bringing it back. And if you do that every week, and certainly every board meeting, those 4 key areas work on consistently. When you look back, the times when the business is the most fun, the most profitable, runs the best, is when it's a square. So you've got to work consciously on keeping it as a square all the time. And that will definitely drive you towards making $1 million.
I love it. And you'll hopefully have more fun in the process too, because you won't have so many problems that you're dealing with, right? And skewed. I absolutely love that. Where can we find more about you? And are you online? Are you on social media? Anything like that?
Yeah, sure. I do a bit on LinkedIn, not so much on Facebook, bit on Twitter, but I'm going to do more blogging on my own website, themark.co.uk. So sure. But I'm always happy to answer questions. So if people want to ping me an email, then I'll just reply, sometimes in a different time zone as we all are, but I'll get back to them with some thoughts and ideas if they want. So feel free to contact me.
That's amazing. Thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for taking the time. I so appreciate it. I hope you have a fantastic day.
Thank you, Jamie. I've really enjoyed it too. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening and investing in yourself with your time. I so appreciate it. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would be forever grateful if you would be willing to leave a rating or review in whatever app you use for your podcast. I know that's what really bumps it up in the rankings. And I would so appreciate your time, especially if you've been a long-time listener. But of course, if you like this episode and you're brand new, thank you for being here too. Have an amazing, amazing day.